we're in extraordinary times here. Just put into context for us, if you can, the scale of the challenge facing athletics in the midst of this wider pandemic.
Well, it's a mountainous challenge. It's not a unique challenge to athletics any more than it is to other sports. You know, the whole planet is dealing with a very straitened set of circumstances. But no, athletics is strong. We're resilient. We've got wonderfully creative stakeholders. We've got great meeting directors. We've got great local organising committees. We've got great cities and municipalities. Crucially, we've got some of the smartest and most ingenious athletes who have kept the flag flying for us all, and often in some of the most creative virtual ways. So, yeah, it's a challenge, but we're getting through.
You talked about your time as an athlete when you'd be planning years ahead for what you were going to be doing next and over the next few years. How is it going to be for these athletes with such uncertainty? Do you have concerns for their mental health as well as their physical health at this stage?
Look, one of the driving forces for us to really push for the postponement of the Games was to take the athletes out of that emotional turmoil, that roller coaster. And by the day, in speaking to them in the lead up to the decision the International Olympic Committee made, I was really clear that they were struggling. You have to be resilient to be an Olympic athlete. You have to be a tough breed. I think that's a given. But there was no doubt to me that they were under an inordinate amount of pressure. They were trying to train on the basis that they were going to be called to compete later in the year. And I didn't want to put them in a position where they felt they had to go out and train often and maybe in opposition to government edict or breaking local public health authority regulations. And worse than that, the fear that it wasn't just about them going out and training and maybe getting ill or infected, but the thought that by implication they could be infecting their loved ones, their families, maybe their children, maybe their grandparents. And so it was really important that we were in a position to really put some pressure on making the decision sooner rather than later. I think it was the right thing to do. We speak to the athletes all the time. They were very grateful we took that position. The challenge, of course, was then recreating the jigsaw into 2021 and then into 2022 with our own World Championships, so that we gave them some structure and some certainty going forward, not just making sure that they weren't competing at a dangerous time this year, but giving them some certainty about when they would be able to train and get back into competition again.
Do you have concerns for their position now? They're away from their normal training infrastructure. They might be away from their coaches, away from their family. What can World Athletics do to reach out to the athletes under your control and make sure they are okay, not just physically, but mentally as well?
It's very important, and we do that all the time. Just in a few hours' time after this interview, I'll have 24 of the Athletes Commission coming through to me on a conference call. We will talk about them. We will talk about some of the challenges going forward, some of the issues around Olympic qualification. It's very helpful for me to hear from them what's actually happening in their own backyard, what the athletes are saying to them, and not just about their physical well-being, but also making sure that they are mentally dealing with such an extreme set of circumstances. The one thing you must remember, of course, is that for those of us who are not worrying about being elite athletes, we are far more used to working collegiately and in groups and in businesses where you may have 20 or 30 people in the room permanently with you at the same time. Athletes have actually learned over the years to work remotely. They've got technology available to them that they've used for many years now. Conversations take place between coaches and athletes in training camps, in training sessions, even after races. and they take place maybe in separate continents, many, many time zones away. And modern technology allows them to remain engaged and communicating to their coaches in a way that most of us are only now just coming to terms with working remotely. Athletes actually have worked remotely for decades.
Do some of the athletes you speak to have concerns that some of the cheats out there may see this as a window of opportunity where out of competition drug testing is obviously so restricted at the moment?
Yes, they do. And we've been able to reassure them that the work of the Athletics Integrity Unit is still flat out. They are still out there making sure that where possible, they are going to provide that level playing field. Look, there's no point in being coy or naive about it. Yes, social distancing, lockdowns have made it difficult for our testing authorities, our big national anti-doping agencies and organisations like the Athletic Integrity Unit and World Athletics to be able to do what they were doing just a few weeks ago. But no athlete should be sitting there thinking this is an anti-doping free zone. There are tests going on, and there's day-to-day monitoring on blood passports. All those sorts of things are still there. But yes, it throws up the challenges. That is why I think the athletes recommended a lengthier period of Olympic qualification suspension, just to make sure that when the athletes did come back, that they were all coming back not just at the same pace from countries that are dealing with the virus, and not just taking into account some of the restrictions that there is in international travel, but also making sure that our anti-doping organisations were back up to full speed before we started looking at Olympic qualifications and places.
What does the road back for athletics look like? There are other sports talking about the possibility of maybe having their events in one single location, having a series of events in one city. The global nature of athletics obviously makes your job that much more difficult. What does it look like? What sort of options are you considering at the moment?
Well, look, we're looking at everything, and actually, we wouldn't have chosen to re-engineer ourselves at this moment because of the virus. It's always better to think like that when you don't have pressures, but inevitably, when you do enter a period of crisis, it's a good opportunity to think things through again. I don't want our sport to look the same as it does now. I think this is a great opportunity to think differently, to have festivals of competition. We shouldn't just be sitting there talking about, tweaking at the edges, the odd change here or rule change there. Let's actually use this time to fundamentally review what is exciting about our sport. What is it that we can build on in the sport that makes it even more exciting and salient and exciting in the lives of young people? And this is the time to do it. So look, the athletes are absolutely behind this. This is a good moment just to think differently. My diary will never look the same. I'm not going to have people flying 8 time zones to make, a 45-minute presentation and then fly 8 time zones back. It makes no sense. So right across business, across every sector you look at, the smart organisations that are going to come out of this and are going to be stronger and more resilient are the ones that are actually thinking like that now. And I want us to think like that, and we are.
Could you see events taking place, sort of made-for-TV events, which don't involve fans initially?
It's possible. I've seen some sports talk about it. I can't tell you that I'm particularly excited by that concept. I want competitions to be able to be resurrected when it's the right time to, and that ultimately has to be the safest and only the safest time for the athletes. We're not in the business of putting them at risk. And I would rather that we use sport to bring communities back together, to have them in our stadiums. Sport, I think, will be the great driver once we get out of this awful pandemic. populations, people, communities from cities to small villages are going to look to sport to help them through this period. So I would actually rather have our outstandingly talented athletes being celebrated by crowds in stadiums that are recovering from some really dark days.
Just one last question, Lord Coe. You've obviously got a great insight into what it takes to organise an Olympics. When you see what Tokyo are going through and the postponement of 1 year, would it perhaps, do you think, have been more prudent just to cancel the Olympics, or do you think the postponement is a viable way of going forward?
No, cancellation would have been out of the question. A postponement was really the only option once, the international federations, the International Olympic Committee, the organising committee, the Japanese authorities at every level had decided that, I'm afraid, sadly, and through gritted teeth, we had to accept that this was a losing battle. We wished it hadn't been, and I think everybody's instinct was to try and hold on for as long as you possibly could, particularly for the athletes, because that's an awful place for them to suddenly lose an Olympic or a Paralympic Games, or at least a summer of competition. Cancellation would not have been the right approach. And apart from anything else, it would have then left a massive void in the international calendar. Athletes love the Olympic Games. They are very important for international federations. And the whole ecosystem of Olympic sport relies upon broadcast rights, sponsorships, all those things that keep our sports healthy and delivering and developing our individual sports.
Lord Coe, thank you so much for your time today. I wish you all the best going forward. I hope we see the athletes back out there soon.
And thank you, and to all of your viewers at home, please stay safe and look after yourselves.